Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's both familiar and surprisingly complex.
Oh, I like where this is going. Familiar and complex, always a recipe for a good deep dive.
Right. We're diving into the history of German Unity Day.
German Unity Day, so October 3rd. I feel like most people at least know the date, right?
You'd think so. But the why behind that date, why October 3rd? Well, that's where things get interesting. We're going to uncover some surprising alternative dates and the reasons those dates got rejected. It's a fascinating look at Germany's story, really.
You know, you're spot on about Germany's history. I mean, just think about it. Before 1871, Germany wasn't the unified nation we know today. It was like a patchwork of kingdoms and principalities, each with its own identity.
So, like, a unified national holiday didn't even really make sense back then.
Exactly. The very concept was new for them after unification in 1871.
Okay, so 1871 hits. Germany officially becomes a nation. Did they go with October 3rd right away?
Not quite. Their first national holiday was actually Tag, celebrated on September 2nd.
Tag, doesn't really roll off the tongue the same way, does it?
Well, it commemorated Prussia's victory over France in the Battle of Sedan, so very military-focused.
Ah, see, a symbol of their newfound unity and all that.
Yeah, it was quite popular initially, especially for those aligned with Prussia. But that focus on military victory, that became a problem as Germany entered the 20th century.
Like people weren't so keen on celebrating a battle anymore.
It was more than that. Tag started to feel, well, exclusive. It didn't resonate with all Germans, especially those who weren't part of Prussia before unification.
A truly national holiday, at least in theory, should be inclusive.
Exactly.
So, Tag fades out. What came next? Did they try any other dates?
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting, you know, each potential holiday really reflected the dominant ideology of that era. The Weimar Republic, for example. They wanted to distance themselves from all that militarism.
Weimar Republic, that was after World War I, right?
Yep. They went with Constitution Day, August 11th, celebrating the birth of a democratic Germany.
New era, new priorities make sense. But then, of course, the Weimar Republic doesn't last.
And with the Nazis, well, the idea of a national holiday took a much darker turn. They weren't big fans of democracy, obviously. They went with dates like May Day and later on, November 9th, the anniversary of that failed beer hall putsch.
Celebrating a failed coup. Not the best look if you're going for unity and peace, is it?
Yeah, it really doesn't. It's almost ironic, isn't it? I mean, November 9th fall of the Berlin Wall, you'd think that would be the obvious choice for German Unity Day.
And yet here we are celebrating in October.
Yeah.
Almost like we skipped over it.
Well, you can't really talk about November 9th without acknowledging the other historical event tied to that date.
Right. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. It's hard to even say the words without feeling the weight of that history.
Absolutely. It's November 9th, 1938, when these Nazi-led mobs across Germany and Austria, they unleashed this wave of violence against Jewish communities. Synagogues are burned, businesses are destroyed, homes are ransacked.
And it wasn't just property damage either.
No, not at all. Thousands of Jewish individuals, they were beaten, they were arrested, and many were murdered. It was a night of absolute terror.
It's unimaginable to think that something so horrific could happen on such a scale.
Kristallnacht, I mean, it marked a terrifying turning point. It was a really stark escalation of the Nazi persecution of Jews, and it foreshadowed the horrors that were still to come.
Knowing that celebrating German reunification on that same date,
well,
it would have been unthinkable.
It would have been deeply, deeply insensitive. I mean, how could you possibly celebrate a new era of German unity while ignoring this horrific event from their past?
You would feel like brushing it under the rug.
Exactly. You can't just pick and choose which parts of history you want to commemorate. It's about acknowledging all of it, the good and the bad.
So November 9th was off the table, which brings us back to our original question, how did they land on October 3rd? It doesn't exactly seem like a date chosen for its rich historical significance.
And you're right, it wasn't. To really understand the choice of October 3rd, we need to shift gears a bit and look at things from East Germany's perspective.
Right. East Germany, we've been so focused on West Germany's side of things, it's easy to forget they had their own whole narrative going on. So East Germany, they had their own national holidays, their own symbols, their own way of looking at their history. What was their big day?
October 7th, the anniversary of the founding of the German Democratic Republic, the GDR. Back in 1949, it was a celebration of their socialist state, their own separate identity.
Right. So you have these two Germanys, each with their own story, their own sense of what it meant to be German, and then boom, the Berlin Wall comes down, and suddenly they're staring at reunification. How do you even begin to merge two completely different national narratives like that.
It was complicated. You said it. It wasn't just about like merging governments and redrawing some borders on a map. It was about trying to merge two whole identities, two different ways of life. And that brought up a whole bunch of challenges, sensitivities that had to be taken into account.
Did East Germany push to keep October 7th as the national holiday, for a unified Germany?
It's interesting. It doesn't seem like that was a huge sticking point. You got to remember, by 1989, East Germany was under a lot of pressure. Politically, economically, things were really rough. Reunification wasn't some far-off dream at that point. It was becoming a necessity.
So practicality won out over, the symbolism of the date.
I think that's a good way to put it. The two Germanys, they were in these intense negotiations with the four Allied powers, these 2+4 talks, to figure out, what reunification would actually look like, how it would all work. And they needed a deadline. Things were moving fast. East Germany held free elections in March of '90, and by August, they'd made the decision. The GDR would basically be absorbed into the Federal Republic, and the target date for that to happen, October 3rd.
October 3rd. I'm going to be honest, it doesn't exactly sound like a date chosen for its deep historical meaning.
Yeah.
If anything, it seems kind of random.
It might seem that way now, but back then, it was about practicality. It gave them a clear timeline, a hard deadline to work towards. And don't forget, choosing a date like November 9th, with all its baggage, that was just never going to fly.
So October 3rd, it was like a clean slate.
Yeah.
A fresh start.
Yeah, exactly. A new chapter for Germany. It was less about looking back at the past and more about embracing the future, moving forward together.
I imagine even with a date set, there were still a lot of mixed feelings in the air, especially in East Germany. Wasn't there some, tension surrounding the final vote to make it official?
Oh, yeah. Definitely not all smiles and sunshine. The vote to make October 3rd German Unity Day official, that happened really late at night, actually, August 23rd, in East Germany's parliament, the Volkskammer. And while the measure passed, it was emotional. For a lot of the East German representatives, it was a really difficult moment.
They felt like their history, their perspective was kind of being swept aside.
That's it, exactly. It was a reminder that even in moments of unity, there can be loss. And for some, I think that loss was very real.
So that brings us to today, October 3rd, German Unity Day. A date that wasn't chosen for its grand place in the history books, but for its practicality during a time of incredible change. It's a great reminder that even our most important national holidays, they're products of their time, shaped just as much by the realities on the ground as by whatever happened in the past. And that's our deep dive for today, everyone. Thanks for joining us as we dug into this often overlooked corner of history. It just goes to show sometimes the most familiar dates have the most surprising stories behind them. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep those brains engaged.